Good morning. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Nice to see you all here today. I'm Frank Nigriello. I'm Director of Corporate Affairs for Unipart Group. We're very happy to be hosting this seminar today, particularly as Unipart has been making its own digital transformation for the past 5 years. And this morning is particularly exciting as we're focusing the morning on digital transformation. In Unipart, we haven't just started moving toward digital and trying to adopt digital in everything we do because we thought it was a good idea. Our markets and our customers are demanding it. And that is something to reflect on here is how much the markets actually now require all companies and all organizations really to consider the impact that digital will have on everything they do. Now, I guess some of you, looking around the audience, will remember Unipart as a provider of all parts, all make parts to all cars on Britain's roads, and maybe even remember some of the adverts that went out about that. Well, that was a very memorable campaign and big part of our brand. I'm pleased to say that we no longer do that. So we're a totally different company now. And in fact, Unipart now provides supply chain solutions and performance improvement technologies to a wide range of some of the best companies in the world, like Vodafone, Sky, Jaguar Land Rover, JCB, Airbus, and the NHS supply chain. We've been helping those organizations to plan for a future in which convergent technologies like artificial intelligence and predictive analytics and physical automation are going to make a real difference and are making a real difference now to the products and services that they provide. And I suppose are making a difference to the products and services that we all consume. So for us, digital transformation has really been fundamental to what we've been doing for the past 5 years, but really has been born out of a set of business systems that we call the Unipart Way. And I'm sure you've heard of lots of companies that have a way. Well, we have a way. We talk about the Unipart Way as the way we think, the way we work, and the way we behave. It's not just about improving processes, it's about creating a culture that promises to go the extra mile for the needs of our customers. Now, later on today, I hope to show you some of that because we're going to take you next door to the Advanced Supply Chain Institute, which was set up only a few years ago, which is really at the heart of being able to work with companies and organizations to see how digital technologies combined with the best use of process and, of course, the best treatment of people can deliver the next generation of benefit both to customers and, of course, to companies and their shareholders. So I'm sure that will be something that makes this very tangible in terms of what we do. And after we finish this session, which will look at the political overview of digital transformation, we will have a break. We'll get some coffee, and when we get back, Tony Hall will lead and moderate a session on the impact of AI. And I think that's something we'll want to hear. Just before we go any further, I need to do a little bit of housekeeping, not too much. There are no fire alarms planned for today. So if a fire alarm does go off, leave, don't hang around, use any of the exits, and make your way to the car park at where you came in, that end of the building. There are toilets in reception and in secondary reception if you need them. The session today is being recorded. It's being recorded for two reasons. One is we're keeping a record for ourselves. The other is because that's how we're communicating with the folks who will be online, that we'll be talking to virtually. And we'll be doing some of that virtual conversation this morning. It's important that when we get to the end of the bits that are presented by our guests, we have some questions from you, and the only way they will hear you is if you wait for a microphone. So someone will bring a microphone to you, but please make sure to wait for that. Before lunch, we're going to take a group photo. I'm sure you all look forward to that. We're going to go through that door and have a photo taken outside. So that's all the housekeeping we need to do for this morning. I'm now very pleased to introduce the two guests we have with us this morning online. Pilar de Castello has been a member of the European Parliament since 2004. She's been serving as coordinator of the group for the European People's Party in the Committee of Industry, Research and Energy, and has been a substitute member in the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs. Matt Warman is an MP for Boston and Skegness. He's a former journalist who serves as Minister of State at the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport from July to September 2022. He was Parliamentary Undersecretary for Digital Infrastructure from July 2019 to 21, and he's been an MP since 2015. Welcome to both of you this morning, and thank you for attending. Thank you for making the time to be with us. What we're going to do is we're going to ask each speaker to make some opening remarks, and I'm going to be looking at them over there, but you'll see them here. And then we're going to do a Q&A with each. Pilar, I know you need to make a hard stop at 10:30, so that's absolutely fine. We need to go, no problem, and we'll continue to 10:45, Matt. So can I just start the morning by asking you, Pilar, would you like to kick off and give us your opening remarks initially?
Yes, of course. Well, to start with, thank you very much. Good morning to everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this very interesting debate, I must say. So sorry because I have to leave in advance. At 11:30 continental time, so at 10:30 for you. Well, to start with, I would like to give you an overview of what the European Union has been doing in order to face all the new challenges we have because the digital transformation. It's going to be something very essential. Just focus on the main things, but I think I can tell you about this in a quite broad sense at the same time. Well, to start, I must say that there is no doubt that digital technologies have ceased to be a sector itself, but it was to become the foundation of all innovative and competitive economic sector. Such is the weight of digitalization that, according to a recent Oxford economics report, by 2025, it is estimated that the digital economy will grow to 24.3% of world GDP. Taking into account that the digital transformation is a global phenomenon, the European Union has an indisputable added value to face its challenges. To start, we have a single market that represents close to 90% of world GDP and has more than 400 million inhabitants, which allows it to develop the economies of scale necessary to compete worldwide. In addition, we maintain globally competitive positions, for example, in the manufacturing industry, industrial software, and industrial robotics. For years, European Union institutions have been making decisions to facilitate the digital transformation in Europe, and the ultimate objective has been and is to develop a single market that ends legislative fragmentation. That has been the objective of the regulation that put an end to roaming, established the right to portability of content, guaranteed the right to privacy, ensure the development of a safe artificial intelligence, increase coordination in cybersecurity, or like the Digital Markets Act has adapted competition rules to the digital sphere. But let me highlight a regulation that has been recently agreed by Parliament and Council, the Data Act. This regulation sets the rules on who can use the industrial data. Establishing, we are talking about IoT scope, establishing the principles that the user must have access to the data generated by his connected products. So far, I must say that 80% of industrial data is never used at all. By doing so, it will boost a data agile ecosystem with access to data currently under use, setting the building blocks for a functional data market. A game changer for the new data economy and a great opportunity for competitiveness and innovation. However, the impact of digitalization in general and data in particular will not be, and is not only economic, it is also geopolitical. During the last years, from the European institution, there has been a growing concern about the excessive dependence of non-European players on infrastructure. Indeed, the EU continues to depend on US processors, and in addition, the cloud infrastructure market, essential for massive data management, is in the hands of 5 non-European suppliers. In this sense, it's worth highlighting the strategic role of the first digital program named Digital Europe, which with a budget of 7.5 billion euros will contribute to provide the European Union with greater capabilities in the area of infrastructure. On the other hand, the recently adopted European Chips Act also plays a strategic role, a regulation that will mobilize 43 billion euros with the aim of doubling the current market share of Europe in processors from the current 9% to 20% in 2030. Coming to this point, I would like to underline that, in my view, the EU approach to digital policies must never be based on a protectionist narrative. Quite on the contrary, we have to reinforce our cooperation with partners that share the importance of democratic values, such as free trade, for example. In this sense, the creation of the Trade and Technological Council to reach further understanding with the US is very welcome. It is becoming a successful forum to strengthen cooperation in technological development and digitalization. In this sense, I would like to add the importance of reinforcing cooperation with the United Kingdom. Indeed, the digital chapter of the trade agreement between the EU and UK has clauses such as, first, no customs duties may be placed on electronic transmissions, or no prior authorization requirements are to be imposed for services provided electronically, or contracts can be concluded by electronic means, and authentication and trust services can be conducted electronically. And coming to an end, in my view, it is pivotal that coordination continues to strengthen in order to ensure data transfer, be it personal data or not. Let us not forget that data is the nutrient of the AI. In addition, data transfer are an integral part of overall services trade and play an increasingly important role in goods commerce. Approximately 3/4 of Britain's data flows are with EU countries. In some, the continuity of data transfer is crucial. And I leave it here because if not, that will be too extent for the time we have. Thank you very much again.
Thank you, Pilar. Thank you so much. Matt, can I hand over to you?
Yes, of course, lovely, and thank you for the invitation. I'll be fairly brief so that we've got time for both of us to take some questions before Pilar has to go. But building on what Pilar has said, I suppose there are two things that strike me that from something that is not solely a UK perspective. And the first is that what we're going to see is an acceleration and a continuation of what regulators and politicians have wrestled with over the last 5 or 10 years when it comes to thinking about all things digital. And the first is, how do we make sure the infrastructure is in place? And the second is, how do we make sure we have a kind of nimble enough regulation that we don't stifle innovation, but we also don't allow what has happened on social media, for instance, to happen again. And that is where clearly we are playing catch up. Now, all of the things that Pilar mentioned, particularly around data, obviously they underpin all of that, but we're going to have to move into a mode where, and this is obviously starting to happen to some extent already, but where we acknowledge that global companies need to be regulated in a way that is not necessarily compatible with the traditional ways of individual nation states doing it. There needs to be much greater collaboration and cooperation between major players. There needs to be an acknowledgement that there are going to be some very different values in some of those some of those countries. And for instance, the AI summit that the UK Prime Minister is in the process of organising for later on this year, I think is a really interesting example of saying it is obvious that you need to have everyone, every possible country within reason round a table, but you also need to acknowledge that not all of those countries are going to come away signing up to the same set even of principles. So what does progress look like? What does reasonable regulation look like? What does modern collaboration and cooperation look like? And that diplomatic effort, I think, is going to be a huge focus across, obviously across the EU, obviously across the nations outside it, and the major players such as the US and China. So trying to navigate what is a very different dynamic, whether it is thinking about what does this mean for Meta, all the big companies we've heard of, but of course also for, in some ways, trying to think of the big companies we haven't heard of yet, is going to be immensely difficult. And as I say, I think the approach that people like Rishi Sunak is taking is an example of trying to do things new, trying to do new things and trying to do them differently. I suppose the one thing I would add to that is that we shouldn't, it seems to me, forget that we have big global institutions already. The G20 is happening as we speak, more or less. We shouldn't ignore the fact that they will have a really important opportunity to make a real difference in this sort of space. So I think it's going to require us to create some new institutions and to maximize the use of the ones that we've got. Those two things will be really important. And the second thing I would say is, obviously in the UK and in a host of other countries, we've seen in the telecoms rollout a sudden huge reliance on companies like Huawei that has had to be unwound relatively quickly. As Pilar said in her remarks, there is a real risk that when it comes to semiconductors, we end up in a position that is possibly even worse than that. And the efforts from the EU are huge sort of in cash terms, huge in terms of the diplomatic shift as well. But the fact remains that we are going to be seriously reliant on Taiwan for a long time to come. And managing that process is going to be very tricky, especially given the somewhat parlous state of some of the diplomacy around that country anyway. So I think trying to triage the modern diplomacy around regulation is going to be challenge A, and challenge B. Obviously, there are many other challenges, but to pick two that I think are going to be the two that we need to have our eyes on most. That diplomacy around global regulation in a world where we continue, of course, to have countries that have very different sense is going to be the hardest part. The second part that in some ways underpins all of it is trying to make sure that we don't repeat the infrastructure mistakes that we've made in the past, because of course there's no point in talking about global regulation of anything or globally cooperative regulation of anything if you haven't got the ability to react and connect people to the latest requirements of newer technologies. I will pause there because I know we've only got Pilar for 5 more minutes, but those two immense diplomatic challenges might not sound like they're immediately solely tech, but I think they will be the two issues that we're going to really have to wrestle with and wrestle with them sooner than we think.
That was really excellent. Thank you so much to both of you. If I could just kick off the questions with just something that's been on my mind and certainly probably on the mind of some people with us, and that's how we're going to deal with China in the future. Matt, you mentioned Taiwan. That will be an emerging political issue. But there is an economic issue. There is a trade issue with China, and you know, whether there are rumors or whether there are actual reports about China's relationship with Apple, and you know, announcements about the way Chinese government would regulate, even in a soft way, the use of Apple products, raises the question about how we manage in a relationship with China into the future, where we are so dependent on much of the technology that is either coming from there in innovation or is just manufactured there. And I wonder if you could maybe both comment on that. Pilar, could we start with you?
Pilar, why don't you go first, since we're going to
Yes,
lose
well,
you.
since I have to leave in 3 minutes, that's a very good question, and a very difficult question to give an opinion beyond what we have been doing to now, beyond in two senses. One is to pay attention to our needs. As I said, regarding, for example, the semiconductors, chips, and the new law in the European Union, trying precisely to be not so much dependent on third countries. But in any case, it's impossible not to depend to a large extent for the coming years, no? So I think there was some regulations, even at national level, with a maximum percentage of using the technologies of certain companies like Huawei and others. But there is not a clear vision, position, and policy on how to handle this. There is, well, something that always postpone. And then, to tell you the truth, from the point of view of the European Union, there is more from the side of to reinforce yourself than from the side of, you know, to put strong limits to the use of those technologies. That's the reality now.
Yeah. Matt?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, obviously, you've seen the UK, EU, US reaction against Huawei. You've seen some of that against TikTok in a different way. Now it appears that we are seeing a really interesting, to put it one way, intervention from China against Apple. I think the short answer to your question is we have to be prepared to live in a world where there is more of this, but certainly almost no country, with the exception of the US, could even countenance existing in a world with no economic interactivity with China. In practice, no one can. So we have to have a grown-up relationship that acknowledges all the challenges around human rights, that acknowledges all of the challenges around the different political systems. But I think there has to be a sensible grown-up way of dealing with this. And you see, in the UK, you see the meeting with the foreign secretary and his counterpart in China, I think, is a sort of important way of saying this is a meaningful thawing of a relationship where we have to be mature about it, but we can't allow that to simply become where we were with China back in the early 2000s, which was a sort of an approach that has clearly burnt countries in the Huawei and other situations that arose after that.
Thank you. Pilar, I know you need to go now, so I'd just like to, before we just say thank you so much again for joining us, and thank you for your contribution.
On the contrary, thank you so much. I'm so sorry I cannot stay for longer, but it was a privilege to be here. Thank you so much.
So Matt, I'm going to open some questions to the audience. And who'd like to start us off? Alex, can we have a microphone down here, please?
Hi, good morning, Matt. Thanks for being with us this morning. I had two questions which arose from your excellent overview to set out. One relates to institutions for rules and regulations governing technology, particularly digital technology. And the second relates to production of those technologies. So firstly, you talked about the need to have new institutions to govern some of the rules, given that these technologies are necessarily cross-border in nature. My first question would be, what does that look like? Is it a sort of wide and shallow approach, whereby you seek to agree as many rules as you can with as many people, noting that that might have a sort of lowest common denominator characteristic to it? Or do you foresee a deeper approach with certain like-minded countries pushing ahead with stronger regulations? Or do you see a mix of both? And I'd also be interested to know from you what you think that the UK's role in that can be. We know, for example, that the Prime Minister is hosting a summit on artificial intelligence, but I wonder as well, into the future, further ahead, where you see the UK. Secondly, on the production of the technologies themselves, you mentioned our dependence on Taiwan, in particular for semiconductors, which obviously, given the political situation in the South China Sea, could be very problematic should there be a crisis, and the impact that that would have on the global economy. My question is, supply chains have developed as they have for a reason. That is because they are efficient and they are done in a way that minimizes costs, which means that those consumers who use these products can have them at a reasonably low price. Obviously, if we're going to shift supply chains away from efficiency and more towards resilience and security, that may come at a cost. And my question to you is, what should that cost be and who should pay it?
Really interesting questions, thank you. So I think on the first one, you're right to say the answer is both. Is it, and when I talk about regulation, particularly for AI, I think we have to bear in mind that almost all of this will be about establishing norms and things that are not sort of hard-edged in enforcement in the vast majority of cases. If you look at organizations like the WHO, then they are very effective at wielding enormous influence because they have the support of their members and vice versa. So it's very much a sort of symbiotic relationship. I think what you will see, though, obviously, is some countries sign up more vigorously to some of those principles, and clearly some of them pay perhaps lip service to them in other ways. I think we have to acknowledge that that will be the reality. There will be, so that you could imagine a world where the EU, for instance, sort of has the traditional relationship where some of this regulation gets transposed into national law. Obviously, the UK has a different relationship to that, but that sort of thing where some countries sign up to quite hard-edged stuff, I suspect, is where we will end up, because as we've seen in social media, it does require some fairly hard-edged regulation to make a difference around the world. But of course, this is not going to be some sort of new global superpower that imposes its will on nation states. That's simply not an option, and nor should it be. But I think you're right that some stuff will be shallow and important, but there's a danger it sort of ends up being motherhood and apple pie. Other stuff will be much harder edged, and some of that around export controls, that sort of thing, obviously is very individual to each individual country. On your second question of sort of that balance, and we see this in energy as much as we see it in tech, sort of the balance between resilience and price, essentially, I think it will, on one level, it's sort of too early to say, because you are seeing already some of those supply chains being reshaped, whether that's via the US, whether that's via the EU. That will inevitably come at some cost. The expectation is that if you look at where the money is coming from in the UK, in the EU, in the US, there is some public money, there is an awful lot of private money. So I think we're looking at sharing burdens because of mutual self-interest, rather than saying, the consumer will end up paying all of the cost, or I think we can't sort of say, well, obviously government has a sort of strategic role in ensuring energy prices are at a sensible level, but it doesn't have it when it comes to big aspects of technology. And you're seeing that already play out in the...
Some sound from you at the moment.
Is that better?
We're back. Yep, that's much better.
Sorry, just to conclude, I think the short version is that you're going to see by necessity
We've lost you again, Matt. While we're waiting for Matt, have we got any more questions that we want to put you to? Okay, so I'll come back to you both as soon as we reconnect.
I would be interested to know whether Matt has any comments on his own party and those elements who are so anti-China that they don't want to have anything to do with them at all. I just wonder whether that's manageable in Conservative Party.
Okay, well we'll get that question in just as soon as we connect. You can ask that directly. But yeah, interesting point. I think it's their end. We're back. Can you hear us?
I can hear you. I've been able to hear you the whole time, which has been a frustrating experience.
And we can hear you. Very good.
Amazing.
Okay, well, we have a question for you now, so I'll just get, and then we have two more here.
Hello, can you hear me? No?
Yeah, he can hear you.
Oh, you can hear me.
Ask the question.
I just had a question. As you know better than I do,
I can hear you.
good. As you know better than I do, there are certain elements in your party who believe that China is beyond the pale in all regards for reasons with which you are familiar. I'm just interested in whether these extreme antagonisms to China is manageable by your party.
So you're absolutely right to say that there is a spectrum, but I don't think, if I'm honest, the spectrum ranges that widely. There are some people who take a slightly more, I'm thinking about people who have sort of formed groups, people like Alicia Kearns. Actually at the other extreme of that, saying there's nothing to worry about. We don't have to have any skepticism. We don't have to have any worries about companies like Huawei or TikTok or whatever. So I think that the challenge is possibly narrower than we might think. If you look at the recent energy bill, for instance, where there were some tech-related conversations around amendments on things like human rights issues around who is making bits of kit that's really important, solar panels, that sort of stuff, then while there were those conversations, there was not a split within the party on how should we be talking about who's manufacturing what. So I think there's a risk of sort of listening to the rhetoric and imagining that there are greater divisions than there actually are. I'm not pretending that there isn't a range of views, but I think the short answer to your question is yes, it's certainly a manageable issue. And there is cross-party consensus across Labour, Conservatives, Liberal Democrats, SNP, all of that, to say there are real security challenges that we have to acknowledge. Pragmatically, that looks like cautious and careful, honest engagement. You might have sort of different views about what that looks like in detail, but I think there is, to coin a phrase, more in common than that which divides us on this issue.
Thank you. We have a question here.
Hello, Matt. I hope you can hear me, and Russia isn't listening in, or somebody else. You know, you're talking about security, but I'm sure everybody here is very proud of the work you're doing, and also heartened to see the visit to China from the Foreign Secretary. I don't know everyone here, but I suspect, like myself, a lot of people have been in the digital business in the past. I used to travel to Taipei a great deal. The economy is going to be a huge issue at the next general election. Without business and reaching out as companies that some of us have worked for, going to places like Taiwan, making communication and buying products, Apple really needs to come to the forefront too, larger companies too, to reach out to government. And I would be interested to know which groups in government are truly working to build business with and keep the connections with Taipei and in Taiwan. Which groups are there working at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, the short answer is obviously this is primarily done through the Foreign Office, but in practice, it's the Cabinet Office that runs the security of these sort of economic security, essentially, and that's shifted recently from what was DCMS, now called DCIP, but same difference in this context. Across every single part of the economy, cuts across every single part of government, and it means that Oliver Dowden at the Cabinet Office is able to take a much more strategic overview of where does this issue sit, where does it bite hardest, if I can put it in those terms, and how can Britain, in particular, work with our allies, because this isn't something that we or any other country really could ever do on our own. So the short answer is the fact that it is now run out of that department that coordinates across government as a whole, I think is something that we should be reassured by.
I think part of that question was how is the Cabinet Office working with industry to be able to do that, isn't it? How is it engaging with companies?
Yeah, so I think, well, to be, I was a minister at DCMS when we did some of this. I can't speak very easily to how the Cabinet Office has changed the sort of details of the engagement, but practically, a lot of this is working with industry bodies, it's working with individual companies, and also crucially making sure that the government has a sense of where emerging UK companies, where emerging UK technologies are going to be particularly crucial in this. And when it comes to semiconductors in particular, we have really important parts of the IP and design landscape sitting within the UK, but it is, of course, not the same thing as actually building the stuff here. So it's about both cross-government, cross-industry, and international collaboration.
Thanks. We've got time for one more quick question.
Simon Card, the US is an important key to the digital future of the world. Do you have a view on the impact if the USA endures a second Trump term?
Yes, I think there is. I suppose I'd say two things. I'd say the thing that moved the dial on Britain's relationship with Huawei was an intervention that President Trump made, which was fundamentally and it was very clever. It was to use patents to stop Huawei being allowed to use US technology in a lot of its kit. And therefore, where we were able previously to say, we are comfortable that this bit of Huawei equipment is secure enough for UK networks, the US approach was to force them to redesign things from the ground up. And that's why the UK had to take a new approach, in part because the US had a lever that no other country on earth has. Now, that tells you, I think, that President Trump would be incredible, would continue to be robust if he were to take if he were to get a second term. I think, if I'm honest, the challenges and opportunities that a second Trump presidency would present would not be limited to technology. So we may have rather more on our plate if we had to wrestle with that.
Indeed, it may be letters from Folsom Prison. Matt, thank you so much for taking part today. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for tolerating the problems we had with technology. It was great for you to join us. Really appreciate it. Could you just please thank you?
Pleasure. Thank you ever so much, everybody.